What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for my mid-season predictions. We're going to give updated predictions for all of the Power 5 Conference Championship games. I was going to go through and do the full standings and look at the predictions up to this point and all of that, but just not going to have time to get it in this week. So instead, we're just going to look at the conference champions from each of the Power 5 conferences. Look back at my preseason prediction and see if I've changed any of these. And yes, I have changed some. Not all of them, but I have changed some of them. And not going to predict the winners because that'll kind of ruin the New Year's 6 prediction video that I'll be doing tomorrow. So I'm just going to predict who's going to make it to the championship game. And we'll start with the ACC. So Clemson, Miami. This was my preseason prediction. Most people had this prediction. Some people had Pitt out of the Coastal Division, but pretty much everyone had Clemson. There were actually a lot of people that thought Clemson was overrated and they were going to lose a few games. So let me take that back. Yes, there were some that were predicting NC State, or especially NC State, maybe even some picking Wake Forest. But yeah, NC State was the team out of that Atlantic Division that everyone was in love with. I did pick Clemson. I thought that it would be a good race, but yeah, I picked the Tigers, and I picked Miami, which was, of course, a terrible pick. Although I say it's a terrible pick because they're just nowhere near as good as I thought they would be, but they do still have a chance. I mean, they only have one conference loss, so everything's right there in front of them. If they win out, they'll have a chance to maybe get in, but they'll need North Carolina to lose a couple of games, and that's the reason why I'm picking the team that I am. I'm picking North Carolina to make it to the ACC championship. Now I have Clemson versus North Carolina instead of Miami. I just think that having that tiebreaker over Miami, the fact that Pittsburgh has not looked very good. You look at the schedule for North Carolina, they've got Duke, and then they have Pittsburgh at home. Virginia has really struggled, so they should win their next 3 games. And then you've got Wake Forest and NC State there towards the end of the season. Even if they lose those 2 games, they would have 2 losses, but they still probably win that division. And so, yeah, I think North Carolina will win the Coastal Division. Clemson, now that they have passed Wake Forest and NC State, it's hard to imagine Clemson not winning the Atlantic unless Syracuse can keep it going or something like that. Even if they lose to Florida State on Saturday night, they're still going to have a lead on Florida State. They'd have to lose another game, and I just don't really see them losing 2 games. So I'm sticking with Clemson, changing to North Carolina out of the Coastal Division, and a division that's really, I mean, it's kind of wide open. North Carolina's in great shape because they haven't lost a game yet, but if they start losing, yeah, that race right there will be kind of like the Big Ten West. Let's go to the Big Ten now. My preseason prediction was Ohio State versus Purdue. I still am sticking with Ohio State, as we'll now look at my updated prediction. Actually, it's the same on both sides, so I'm still sticking with Ohio State. I think they're vulnerable. Not because they're not a good team, but just I think Penn State and Michigan have turned out to be really good this year, and those are both going to be tough games. They play on the road at Penn State, so I do think that there is a chance that Ohio State could lose a game this year. But I mean, I'm picking them still to go undefeated. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten, maybe the best team in the country, and so I'm sticking with that prediction. Although I'm not as confident in the preseason. I just didn't think anyone was going to touch Ohio State, and maybe they still won't. But I do think that those games could potentially sneak up, and one of them could get them. Michigan, Purdue playing Saturday, and we're going to find out a lot more about those 2 teams. Then on the other side, Purdue, they lost to Penn State, but they got a huge win over Minnesota. That's the reason why I'm picking Purdue to win this division. The winner's going to have probably 2, 3, maybe even 4 losses because this division is just wide open. And I just think the schedule sets up really, really well for Purdue the rest of the way. They had a tiebreaker over Minnesota. That was a really good road win. They have Nebraska at home coming up. They'll have Wisconsin on the road, then Iowa. Both of those teams have really struggled this year. Illinois on the road. Could be tricky, but I think Purdue's the better team. I think they'll win that game. They have Northwestern at home and Indiana on the road. So, yeah, they could even lose a couple of those games and still be in great shape. I think 3 losses still gives you a chance. I think they might only lose a couple of those games. Well, that would give them 3 total losses. So, yeah, a couple of those games could go the other way for them. But I think having the tiebreaker over Minnesota is big. Wisconsin and Iowa, if they continue to struggle, that Illinois game could wind up being really big. If they lose that game, Illinois could wind up winning the West. But I still think that division is wide open, but I'm going to go with the team that has the best schedule, and that, in my opinion, is Purdue. All right, my preseason prediction in the Big 12 was Oklahoma versus Baylor. A lot of people had this prediction. It was some combination of Oklahoma, Baylor, and Oklahoma State for pretty much everyone. Maybe a few people would have stuck Texas in there potentially in the preseason, but these were the teams that I think most people had. Now you look at it, Oklahoma, they're not going to the Big 12 championship. It's just not going to happen. This team is not good. Even if they win out, I don't think they're going to get in. And Baylor already not looking as good as we thought they would. So who's going to get in there? I'm going to change my picks for both of these teams. I think it's going to be Oklahoma State and Texas. This is my prediction for the Big 12. I think it's actually going to be a three-way tie. Oklahoma State, Texas, and TCU. I think all three teams will have 2 conference losses. The tiebreakers will go to Oklahoma State and Texas. And I won't go through all the time, but I did actually go through it and kind of look at how I thought all the teams. When you have a tie and you can't go to head-to-head because they would all be 1-1 against each other based on my predictions, then you go to their record against the highest-ranked team. And I think Oklahoma State and Texas beat Baylor, but I think that TCU, maybe they fall on the road to Baylor. So I think TCU has a great season. They're right there in the running. Those are the 3 teams that I think are the front runners in the Big 12. Can't count out Kansas State, but they have a really tough schedule coming up. Kansas, I know everyone wants to talk about them, but they have a lot of tough games coming. Baylor's not out of it. But yeah, I think it's going to be Oklahoma State and Texas. I think Texas is going to be the best team in the Big 12 by the end of the season. They really, with Quinn Ewers, are a really good football team. And I think we saw that against Alabama when they played them really close, and then against Oklahoma last week where they just completely annihilated them on both sides of the ball. So that's my prediction. I changed both of my picks in the Big 12, but I did say in the preseason that this conference was wide open. I said the teams would beat up on each other and we would not get a playoff team out of the Big 12. I'm sticking to that. And again, I think the 2 teams in the conference championship game will have 2 conference losses. Texas actually with 3 losses because of the loss to Alabama. So that's my prediction for the Big 12. Going to the Pac-12, my preseason picks, Utah versus Oregon. This is possible, but I think Utah losing to UCLA last week, it's going to make it tough. Even if they beat USC, you look at them still having to go on the road to face Oregon. I think the Pac-12 is going to have 3 or 4 teams with 1 or 2 losses at the end of the year. I think you're going to have teams that are still in that playoff conversation. I think that the Pac-12, those top 4 teams, Utah, Oregon, UCLA, and USC, are all going to be top 10-ish teams. Maybe one of them drops a little bit. I think right now I'd probably have to go with Utah since they have the 2 losses. But I think looking at the rest of the schedule for these teams, I'm going to stick with Oregon. They get Utah at home. They get UCLA at home, I believe. Let me go back and check on that real quick. But yeah, they get Utah at home, and that's a big-time revenge game as well. When you look at losing to them twice last year, and just the way that Oregon is playing, they are rolling right now. Bo Nix is playing great football. Yeah, they get UCLA at home, and they get Utah at home. And they don't have to play USC. That means Oregon could be sitting there at 11-1 going into the Pac-12 championship, an undefeated conference record. And potentially, they could work their way back to the college football playoff with that 1 loss coming to Georgia in week 1. So Oregon is in great shape right now. Really like the way the schedule sets up for them. So I'm sticking with Oregon, and I'm going to make a change to USC. I think USC is the other team. I actually think they might lose to Utah on Saturday just because it's a tough road game. A Utah team that is going to be really fired up after a loss, a desperate type team. UCLA is in the running as well. I think UCLA has a great shot. The schedule sets up well for them. They get USC at home. I think USC is able to either win that game or win the Utah game. I think they'll win one of those 2 games. UCLA, at the end of the day, maybe they finish with a couple of losses. 10-2, still a great year. Oregon's a team I feel confident in just because of the way their schedule sets up, like I said. The other is, for me, is between UCLA and USC. I think it's between those 2 teams. I'm going to say USC, but it's flip a coin. That is a tough one to predict. All right, how about the SEC? Alabama and Georgia, my preseason prediction. No reason to change anything. I'm sticking with this in the SEC. Something to watch is Tennessee. What if Tennessee, they lose to Alabama, but what if they beat Georgia and their only loss is to Alabama? Tennessee could get in the SEC championship. If Tennessee splits, let's say they beat Alabama and lose to Georgia, Tennessee could possibly make the college football playoff without even going to the SEC championship. So Tennessee is a team to really watch out for. But I'm going to stick with this pick. Alabama and Georgia. I still think there's a good chance that both teams are undefeated at the end of the year. Maybe they lose one game. Alabama, let's say they lose to Tennessee, but still I think they're going to get there. Georgia, maybe they can't lose to Tennessee. That can't be their one loss. I don't see anyone beating Georgia right now. So again, my prediction for the SEC has not changed. Would love to get your thoughts on the Power 5. Give me your predictions for all the conference championship games. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.